Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star Sports podcast presented by First Federal Bank. It's Wednesday, August 24th, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. Len Dawson has passed away. He was 87. The family had announced that he had entered hospice care 2 weeks ago, so this doesn't come as surprising news, but still, it's a blow. It's also a celebration, and that's what today's show is all about. We'll open with a conversation with columnist Vahe Gregorian, who may have had the last lengthy sit-down interview with Len 5 years ago when he was about to call his final season from the Chiefs radio booth. And we'll conclude today's show with a recording Vahe made that day. After a break, you'll hear from Dawson in a 2009 interview conducted by the Star's Todd Feeback, interviews of play-by-play announcers Dawson worked with, Kevin Harlan and Mitch Holthus, an interview with former Chiefs beat writer Bill RIchardson on why Super Bowl IV was a bittersweet occasion for Dawson, and finally, a piece of Dawson's interview with Vahe. Let's get started. Well, Vahe, Len Dawson passed away earlier today. Of course, we're recording this on Wednesday, and we knew it was coming when he entered hospice care, about 2 weeks ago, a little less than 2 weeks ago. So it doesn't make the moment any less sad. When we woke up to the news this morning, and it was like this Len Dawson passed away. It's a world without Len Dawson. Here we are.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's funny, you get a little chance to gird yourself, but I think you don't really feel the full sense of the meaning of it till the event actually happens, right? A lot of times we, in our business, need to be cognizant of these things and, work ahead a little when those happen, but you don't feel the emotional connection to it till it actually happens. It's just that way. And I guess that's an important point that I think even as reporters, even as sort of outsiders who came to Kansas City, me more so than you since you've been here so long, we had a sort of long-time sense of Len Dawson, not just as a Kansas City icon, but as a national treasure.
You and I, let's see, we're both north of the 60 mile per hour sign. We became sports fans in the late 60s, early 70s when Len Dawson was still playing and had his greatest moment as a professional athlete, leading the Chiefs to the Super Bowl victory for the 69 season. And so so we knew who Len Dawson was. He was a star of our youth, a star athlete from our youth. Saw him on TV all the time and watched when we saw the Chiefs. He was the quarterback of the Super Bowl winning team. But then, as you mentioned, I came to Kansas City in 1989, and you came in 2013. And Len Dawson was so much a part of life in Kansas City in a way that I'm not sure a lot of stars of our youth became. He was on TV all the time. He was Chiefs radio broadcaster. He had already, I can't remember when the HBO This Week in the NFL groundbreaking series ended, but he was every bit a part of that, and he was the star of it. So it's a unique relationship that this city had with him, and that you and I had with him.
Yeah, that's right. And this is funny. Again, not to hearken too much to our youths, but I think of this when I think of people that we followed in that era. Somebody you grew up, in your case, I always think of Roberto Clemente, right? But I think of the people that you followed really closely. When you encounter them in your adult life, they're one of the few occasions, at least in my experience, that sort of makes you revert a little bit to that feeling you had as a kid. And I think I had that with some, University of Texas people that I'd followed as a kid and Philadelphia people when we moved there. And Len Dawson was a little different because it was at a distance. On the other hand, you were just as cognizant of, oh, that's Len Dawson, the guy that I was watching when I first saw Sports Illustrated and saw Super Bowl and my NFL Action 72 stamp album. And there was something about him that just exuded the cool we all talk about, which is why I don't think we just saw him as a player. We saw him as just this really cool guy that seemed like the template for what you wanted as a NFL, and we should remember AFL quarterback. So then to have, develop relationship with him to some degree. I mean, I know we both had lots of opportunities to talk to him, and I had a couple extended sit downs with him. And I think that was what was really neat about his place in Kansas City. Look, along with George Brett, we've talked about this many times. Those guys really epitomize the people that weren't from here that became completely ingrained in the community and stayed. And they're not the only ones, but they're right at the top. And it's always been kind of, I think, a telling thing about them, but also about Kansas City.
Yeah, I remember about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I did a Mount Rushmore of Kansas City sports figures, and these were just athletes, not owners or even coaches. And Dawson and Brett were and Tom Watson, the golfer, of course, were the three slam dunks on a Kansas City sports Mount Rushmore. And that kind of took me a while to come up with the fourth. It was Buck O'Neil at the time, and it probably still would be now. But anyway, yeah, that's what's happened is we've lost a face from the Mount Rushmore of Kansas City sports. And you, of course, had one of the last extended media visits with Len Dawson. Went to his house. This was in 2017, the year it was announced that Len would conclude his career as a broadcaster on Chiefs radio, an analyst. And later in the show, after we take a break, we're actually going to play a clip, about a minute and a half, a clip of your interview with Len Dawson. So, what do you remember about that occasion? And in watching reviewing that clip, he was, he seemed, I don't know if seemed like he was ready to step down, but anyway, he sounded good and seems like he could have gone on a little longer if he wanted to.
Yeah, I had a little bit of that feeling that day. What I remember him, it was quite striking. I can't remember if it's in the clip or just part of the rest of our conversation, but he spent a lot of time that day talking about his sadness about the terrible conditions so many of his era were in. And I think he used the term, that they're just existing. I'm still going to live. And at the time he was still, I think, taking daily walks in Loose Park, and he didn't live too far from there. And a few other things that I think he thought were going to help keep him young. On the other hand, it's also true that I might have been there. Me, Blair, the thing that wouldn't leave. I might have been there 2 hours, and probably I should have left 45 minutes earlier. I think he got a little tired, and I think you started to see at that point a little bit of what was beginning to become evident about some memory issues. They spoke. His wife Linda that day, I think, spoke about a little bit of memory care he was getting, and so it at that time though, I didn't. Look, that's even 5 years ago. So it's not like this happened right away afterwards. One of the things that people probably know is that we didn't see a lot of him the last few years, and there's some questions and complications about that. I mean, not many people were able to see him. So we don't really know. I couldn't even tell you exactly. We know cause of death, and I don't know that that's necessarily important. He's 87 and lost my dad at 87, and these things happen.
Yep. So I remember, I don't know if it was the following year, may have been the following year in 2018, Len came up to the press box for the first regular season game that year at home, and sat where we sit in the press box in the star seats there, and was just wanting to visit and chat, and it was great to see. He's asking questions about the team, I remember, and what we thought of things. That was something else I'll always remember about Len, is whenever you encountered him, whatever it was for, he wanted to know what you thought about the team, whatever's going on in the NFL. kind of had a curious mind, which made him, pretty good media member for the many decades.
Yeah, that's interesting. And chicken and egg on whether that he did that because he was in the media or he went in the media because he did that. I tend to think the latter, right? That whatever. It's a funny story, of course, about how he got into that to begin with, but there had to be a sense of impetus in him to, well, I'll try it out, even though I got this other full-time job, quarterback in the Chiefs, but I smiled as you were saying, bringing that up, Blair, because one of the thoughts I had about him was he really tended to look you in the eye. It was a little disarming in some ways, but also very congenial. I mean, Len Dawson's really looking me in the eye, waiting for my answer. And as he did with everybody, I don't mean me. I mean, and that was, I think, one of those, I think that quality of him spoke to why we see the outpouring we do today, right? There's a lot of people who were around him, worked with him, were in his sphere of influence that you might expect that from, but you also see it from people, a step or two removed who just had an encounter with him once, and they remember it for, something that showed he was paying attention, not just strutting along. One of our colleagues said he bumped into him somewhere when it was really cold out, and he said, "Wow, it's Lenny the Cool." And he goes, "Don't you mean Lenny the Cold?" It just stuff like that. He would engage. And I just think that's pretty neat, right? That not every superstar is that way. Probably fewer and fewer are today because there's so many more buffer zones between the ordinary person and the superstar, right? Whether it's the financial means or just sort of the entourage around him. I don't think Len Dawson was really ever that way.
That's a good point, Vahe, and it just prompts me to think that I didn't see him around town, but at occasions when I'd see him, he was happy to engage with anybody. He was, he did have a bit of an everyman presence to him in those, on those occasions. So, let's go back a little bit to, the reason that he became Len Dawson was his football. He was drafted in the first round by the Steelers in 1957 and then languished on the bench for Pittsburgh and then the Cleveland Browns. And he gets traded to the then Dallas Texans for the 1962 season and leads that team to the AFL championship. The Texans become the Chiefs for 1963. And lo and behold, there's Len Dawson, quarterback from the Kansas City Chiefs. 1966, they win the AFL title and play in Super Bowl I, lose it. And a few years later, Super Bowl IV and wins it. He's the MVP. And another clip we're going to play after the break is former Star reporter and Chiefs beat writer Bill RIchardson covered Len Dawson throughout his entire career, but was also at Super Bowl IV when Len Dawson went through that gambling situation, that the story that broke, and Bill RIchardson has a real insider's take on what happened in New Orleans that week. So hope you stay tuned for that. But and you alluded to it already, Vahe. It was in 1966 that Len became broadcaster for the first sports anchor for Channel 9, KMBC here in Kansas City. That's incredible. I mean, who did? And he needed the job. That's why he did it. He needed the gig.
Right. I think I'm making this up a little bit, but he's making $30,000, had a family to support. It cracks me up nowadays when you hear a guy, I don't think I can settle for 10 million. I got a family to feed. Then they really did the extra thing. And as I recall, anyway, and this is the case. You might remember it better, but Jack Stedman, then the kind of president, GM, money guy, thought that it might behoove the Chiefs to have a star of Len's ilk be in the spotlight in a different way to help drive ticket sales, and figured it was win-win for TV to have him on there. And so they struck up the deal. And one of the things Len said, so picture this for our listeners who, don't know the whole story. I mean, so now he's leaving practice and going over to to do the 6 and 10, right? He's doing the 6 and 10 sports, but he's also either coming back to practice or before he leaves, doing interviews with Chiefs players. Like he's doing the interview with them. And he was sort of joking, but I don't know if it was really a joke when he said he'd give them not only the questions, but the answers too. And I can only envision, all I could do to think of how absurd that would seem today is just picture Patrick Mahomes, hurrying out of practice, his hair is still wet, got to get down to the station. It's just crazy. But it was a sign of the times. And look, does that work in Philadelphia or Dallas? I mean, that might be a little bit Kansas City unique also to how that fit.
Yep, I agree. He inducted in the Hall of Fame in 1987. I think he was the third Chiefs player because of when he retired. He went in after Bobby Bell and I think Willie Lanier both went in before that.
Yeah, I think Bobby 83, Willie 86. I think that's right.
Yeah, yep. And maybe not as appreciated historically as he should have been. His career totals aren't overwhelming at all, but he's still the Chiefs' career leader in passing yards and touchdown passes. Mahomes is only a couple of years away from supplanting him on both of those lists, but different era, of course, of football. Then 4 times led the league in passer rating, 8 times in completion percentage. That's an NFL record. Nobody's led the league in completion percentage more than Len Dawson. 4 times led the league in touchdown passes. So in addition to his great media career, he was an incredible football player from the AFL and the NFL days. And
you bring up a great point with that. Go ahead, Blair.
No, I was just going to say in the Hall of Fame, both as a player and a broadcaster.
Yeah, one of 3.
Yep.
that which is pretty amazing. But go back to that stat you just used. It was 8 times completion percentage. That's a great stat because it speaks to the context of the times, right? If you just look at his completion percentage now, the way the game is played now with X, Y, and Z, there's so many other things that just warp the context of that. So a lot of times, right, the best way to identify somebody's greatness is not just over the course of the game, but within the confines of how the game was played then. And I mean, that's amazing, right? And I don't think people think, Patrick Mahomes isn't as accurate or, whatever. It's obviously it's not the case, but in the context of the times, that very stat will stand the test of time.
Famously known for the photograph of sitting, was it at halftime of Super Bowl I? Do I have the setting right?
Halftime of Super Bowl I. And I didn't know this, but I'm sure we'll link to this. Pete Gradoff put together, I think, a piece for us on the reason those photos weren't originally part of the immediate aftermath, because I think Hank Stram struck up a deal that they'd only use the photos if the Chiefs won. I think that's the case. I'm speaking a little out of school because I've been caught up in some stuff and didn't get to read that yet, but I think that's my understanding of how that went. So because those photos only surfaced about a decade ago, and I've seen people dismiss it as like, well, somebody thought they just weren't that good. I mean, that's pretty iconic photo. And I think, again, talk about context of the times. It just seems outlandish.
Cigarette and a Fresca. That's kind of amazing, and that's the photo probably most widely distributed on social media today. Lenny the Cool.
We've seen that photo used a lot of different ways. We've seen Patrick Mahomes' picture superimposed over it. I had occasion, as we talked about before, I think, to speak with Patrick among others last week about him, and I think that's what Patrick was referring to when he said he doesn't know if he has the swag Lenny has.
All right, Vahe. Really enjoyed the conversation, celebrating the life of Len Dawson. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, you will hear from Len Dawson in the interview that Vahe conducted about 5 years ago, and others speaking about Len Dawson. Thanks, Vahe.
Thanks, Blair.
Buying your first home is a huge milestone, but the journey there can be confusing. First Federal Bank of Kansas City is here to make it simple. After nearly a century of serving the KC community, our loan advisors have experience in every type of housing market. With a short phone call, we can give you a free rate quote and talk through loan options. No pressure, no obligation. The road to home ownership can be simple with First Federal Bank. Get started with a free quote at ffbkc.com/homes. First Federal Bank of Kansas City, because banking is personal. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Hey, this is Blair. There are several ways to access the Star Sports section. Let me tell you about a couple of them. There is Sports Pass. For $12.99 a month, you get unlimited digital access to all of the Star Sports content, including beat writing, columns, features, pretty much everything we write. The deal renews monthly until you tell us to cancel. For $159.99 a year, you get everything the Star has to offer digitally, including sports and the e-edition. Go to kansascity.com and drop down to the bottom of the page where it says Start a Subscription for more information. Your support has never been more important. As always, thanks for reading and listening. Welcome back to SportsBeat KC. In 2009, the Star's Todd Feeback sat down with Len Dawson for an interview, and Len shares some insights on how much the game has changed since his playing days.
You know, players today in football, regardless of the quarterbacking position or any other position, they're much larger. They got into weight programs. Hank Stram, my coach, was the first coach that hired a strength and conditioning coach the year round. Nobody had done it in professional football. And this is back in the 60s. Well, nowadays, you know, there's weight training. In high school, I never saw weight until Hank showed up with this guy, you know, and that's through high school and through college. But that is a big change. But that's just human beings are larger today than were 30, 40 years ago. And as far as the quarterbacking position, there's another aspect of it. I used to call the plays. Not that I made them up, although some of them I did occasionally. But you don't find a quarterback in Pee Wee League, in high school, in college, or professional football that calls a football game. Maybe they can check off a play that doesn't look like it's going to be worth running it because the percentage is not working. But that's the two things that I see. You know, the quarterback doesn't have complete control of the game. The game now is controlled by the sidelines. When you take a look at these colleges, Missouri, for example, they don't even get into a huddle. I mean, the quarterback and the receivers and the linemen are all looking at the coaches over there, telling them what the play is going to be, what the blocking is going to be, and all the routes, what the routes are going to be run. So they don't even get into the huddle. So that's a big change. That's a change that, from my point of view, isn't necessarily the best way. You got to have a leader out there. And the leader should be your quarterback. In order to lead, you at least have to gather these people together to talk to them and to discuss things and also get their input. What's wrong with asking an offensive lineman how he can block somebody? Nothing. I used to do it all the time because that lineman knew better than I how he could handle that guy. So I would prefer it that way.
We got the ball, boys.
Well, I had film. You know, film will break. And so I got a story about the New York Titans, who became the Jets, but they were the Titans in the American Football League. And Harry Wismer owned the team. He was a broadcaster, and he ran out of money. And so they only had two projectors. And when one broke, the offense perhaps was using it, and they had to wait for the defense and vice versa. So today, everything is on tape. It's instantaneous. You can stop it. You can do things. So much better today than it was back when I was playing. So that part is really improved, making your preparation a lot easier than it was back then. So I'm looking at Matt Castle. He has a great opportunity. He's going to get the opportunity to play. I know that they say, you know, you're not given a spot, but let's be serious. They're going to pay him the kind of money they're going to pay him. They're going to give him every opportunity to succeed. Let's hope that they have the rest of the people together on the three phases of the game so that they can be competitive each and every week, and they can bring back a championship to Kansas City. I'm not getting any younger. I'd like to see another Super Bowl championship team.
Among the Chiefs' radio play-by-play partners Dawson worked with from 1984 until 2017 were Kevin Harlan and Mitch Holthus. The Star's Pete Gradhoff recently caught up with Harlan about Dawson, and from a 2018 interview, Holthus tells us what it was like working with an announcer he used to idolize as a player.
I think, again, radio at that time was so important because, games, there was no red zone. You didn't see highlights very often. You saw maybe at halftime of Monday Night Football narrated by Cosell. So, these teams were really after, the biggest names in the history of that team. So for him to do HBO and the national show, and it received rave reviews, and I think that was one of the reasons why he got the broadcast with the Pro Football Hall of Fame. In fact, may have been the biggest reason why he got in there. He had done games for NBC and for I don't know for how long, and then just strictly stuck with the Chiefs. But it was funny. Another memory. We would be doing these Chiefs games, and all these NBC announcers, and NBC carried the AFC at that time for all the years that Leonard worked for NBC. But all these NBC announcers would always come in our booth before the game and say hello. Charlie Jones and Dick Enberg and Jay Randolph. And they'd always come in. So I got to meet, these big network play-by-play guys when I was this kid, and it was huge. And they would see Leonard and just start laughing. Paul McGuire and Bob Trumpy, they would all make it a point to say hi to Len and come in our booth and just visit. And usually just a bunch of laughing that was going on, but it was so cool. Kurt Gowdy, they would come in our booth and say hi to Len Dawson and make it a point to say hi to him. So it was big that the Chiefs radio broadcast, and it was regional, 4 or 5 states as it still is now. But we had a network type announcer doing the home team radio. So yeah, that was a big deal. That was a really big deal.
I would be on the farm on a Sunday afternoon with a 16 shirt thinking I'm Len Dawson. And so the respect and awe was always there, but you can't work like that together. And so I had to get by that. But I do think there was mutual respect. I think Len saw the way that I prepared. He saw the way that I wanted to learn, always asking questions about learning the game of football, as well as learning the art of broadcasting. And I think that won him over because that's the way he is. He wants to do things correctly. And not that he's a perfectionist, but just like he played with a high completion percentage, he wants that in all of the broadcasts. And he saw that I wanted the same thing. And so that set off, again, an immediate chemistry and mutual respect that it's just fun to work with him. It's almost like a quarterback and receiver working together.
In 2014, former Star reporter Bill RIchardson, who covered Dawson's entire career with the Chiefs, shared a story about Dawson's week at Super Bowl IV in New Orleans when the quarterback was associated with a gambling scandal. As Bill explains, nobody was in a better position to report the story than he was.
Somebody with NBC broke a story that this guy in Detroit, a gambler, had contacted about half dozen NFL quarterbacks during the season. And accessibility was easy. You call and ask to speak to somebody on the phone. You get them right away, So one of the 6 was Dawson. Dawson's father had died a couple of weeks earlier, and this guy called in sympathy, and I guess he hoped to get the feeling of how the quarterback felt about the game. And anyway, so the whole horde of reporters jumped on that. Well, this guy must be throwing games, they must have thought. And all he's doing was just accepted a call from this guy and told us it was his father. And I don't think they got into the thing about what's the feeling for the game or anything. And poor Dawson was trapped by a media horde. And so the office called me. I was staying in the same hotel they were in to tell me about what this story was. None of the other quarterbacks got contacted about Namath and Carl Switton and all like that weren't contacted. But everybody jumped on Dawson because he was the Super Bowl. And so the office called me, so I went up to Stram's room and I said, I was asking him about it. I said, about this thing about Dawson. He said, well, why don't you ask him? He's right here. So Dawson looked very visibly shaken. I've never seen him like that. It was really sad. And then he spent a horrible week. And then they decided, they had a long conversation. And ironically, Eddie Pope, from Miami, was up in the same suite to interview Stram. And they told us, Eddie, go hide in a closet or something. We don't want you out here while we're discussing this.
So Pope in the closet?
Yeah, he was in a closet or another room or something without access to. He could overhear them, what they were talking about. And so they decided, well, let's just have a press conference and tell them what we know about it and get this out of the way. Well, they had a press conference that night and took down the information. Then I had to dash to a phone and call and dictate the story to the desk. So, and then they let him alone after that, but he spent a miserable week. He was just in agony the whole week. Felt sorry for the poor guy. And I don't think he slept very well the night before the game. But then he went out and played a great game. Was MVP of the Super Bowl. And in the dressing room, President Nixon called and said, don't worry, we're going to end this thing right now. There won't be any investigation.
The final words belong to Len Dawson. As Vahe said in our conversation, he and Len sat down at the Dawson house about 5 years ago to discuss his final year in the Chiefs broadcast booth. Here's what Len had to say about his career.
It's not going to be difficult to get away from it because I have had like 50 years of it. If you go back to my youth, in high school and college and that, never would I have thought that would have happened. It was never in my mind whatsoever. But the thing is, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time to get that opportunity. And the fact that I had that opportunity that I didn't think I was going to get, I worked at it pretty hard. And so I'm very proud of the fact that I have accomplished things. I'm in the Pro Football Hall of Fame twice. Once as a player, once as a broadcaster. 3 men have done that. And I'm one of the 3 men to do that. So it's been a great run, and I'm not finished yet.
How will this last season feel? I mean, I don't know if it's going to feel like you're, having one last hurrah exactly like that. But what do you suppose it'll be like to go on into the season?
Well, I stopped playing football a long time ago. I'm not going to stop living, but I'm not going to be a change of anything. I've had a great life. You ask somebody else, would you like to have the life of Len Dawson? Never had to work in his life, basically, and that's been me. So I'm just going to keep on tricking those people out there.
That'll do it for today. I want to thank our hardworking SportsBeat KC production staff of Monty Davis, Randy Mason, Todd Feedback, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. A salute to our sponsor, First Federal. Their website is ffbkc.com. Tip of the cap to Vahe Gregorian for sharing his memories and insights of Len Dawson, and to Pete Grathoff for his behind-the-scenes contribution to the show. And thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's show. We'll be back soon with another SportsBeat KC.